In the financial planning industry, you've heard all of the different designations: CFP, CFA, CRPC, CMT, JD, CPA. They're all dealing with numbers. Today, we're going to sit down with one of our team members who recently passed their CFP, and we're going to take a look to see what it took to pass that test. What does having that designation now mean for himself, our firm, and for our industry in general? Because at the end of the day, only 30% of financial professionals have a CFP designation. Welcome to the Capitalist Investor this week. I have Derek's on assignment, and so is Dave. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to introduce one of our other team players here at Strategic Wealth Partners, and that would be Sam Petitjean. He is in April going to be celebrating the first year here at Strategic Wealth Partners with us. He went to John Carroll. Yes, which is sir. Great. All right, so wait, help me with your background just really quick. You are from New Orleans, right?
Yeah, so born in New Orleans. Our family.
New Orleans.
Yes,
yeah, all right, here we go.
Yeah, I'm pronouncing it right, but
all right, good.
But yeah, so family moved up to Buffalo, New York, right after Hurricane Katrina hit. So quite a change of pace. Going from flooding to snowstorms. So that's always fun. But spent most of my life in Buffalo. Always had a strong connection to Cleveland, so when it came time for looking for schools, ended up joining John Carroll University in 2020. Big draw there was obviously just the city of Cleveland, love this place. And, John Carroll was fortunate enough to have a financial planning and wealth management major, which was kind of tied to the CFP board, so was able to kind of get two birds, one stone there. So, awesome. Yeah, it worked out great.
Yeah, so one of the great things with Sam is that, he just took his CFP, Certified Financial Planner, to get the designation, right? And it's a big deal. He passed, congratulations. It's, kind of pencils down, books and, heads in the books and reading and all that fun stuff, after hours, after work and stuff. So it's a lot goes into it. But the purpose of today's show is really to talk about the CFP, because you hear that thrown around. You may or may not know what it means and like what goes into it. So think of it this way, a doctor, it's initials behind your name. It's an alphabet, creating an alphabet behind your name to show that you're a professional. So doctors, MD, an attorney, JD, engineers, I have a couple engineers out there that listen, PE, professional engineer, right? So like these are all tests and designations that quiz you from every angle, essentially, about everything you need to know in your profession. Yep. Right? MDs are probably not going to go and do a tax return, or they're not going to go and, go sit litigation somewhere, right? So engineers aren't going to, build financial plans, even though I do, used to. Right? My background's in engineering, but I never stuck around long enough to get my PE. But anyway, all right, so help me understand a little bit, Sam, like what is having a CFP designation mean for this industry, for our firm, for you? Like what does it do? How does it make you get into that next echelon?
Right. No, I like to think about it, having your CFP, it's like the cream of the crop of financial advising, right? It's the highest designation you can get in our field. That said, you don't need to have your CFP to be a good advisor, but it definitely helps. So within the United States, it definitely helps you separate yourself from the crowd, because only about 30% of advisors here have their CFP designation. Okay. So, that's really kind of putting you ahead of the curve there.
Yeah, so 3 out of 10 advisors that you sit down with, if you're looking for financial help, have the designation, have gone to college and got the finance part of the educational side of things, and then bootstrapped and took the test and passed it. Like that's where I fell off the wagon. I didn't have any of the financial classes I had engineering classes, right? So
Yeah, luckily that was a good thing about Carroll, right? Because, I mean, you can go and be a finance student at, any university, but if you're not meeting the, CFP board classes, then you're going to have to go take a bunch of education classes after school. So
Awesome.
Luckily for me, I double dipped like I mentioned before, but
All right, so let's so there's about what 6 or 7 6 or 7 different. Oh man, Jesus.
sorry.
7, maybe 6. I don't know. We're gonna switch that. Jesus. All right. There's several different programs inside the CFP. What is it? General principles?
Yep, so general principles, big thing there obviously being, the behavioral finance portion of it. You got estate planning, tax planning, retirement planning, looking at investments, insurance planning, and then you have to finish with what's called like a final capstone. So it's essentially just a whole semester-long project, looping everything in together to really get that holistic perspective.
Awesome. All right. So then let's kind of, so when you're going through, I guess the biggest thing I'd like to know is kind of as you went through each one of these chapters, what did you find most fascinating? Like, so when you went through the general principles and the behavioral finance, like what did you discover in that section that kind of like was eye-opening or like you like, I remember, when I studied for whatever, like there's something pops out, it's always going to be stuck in your head now. So what are those things that you saw?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've, been in the industry not quite as long as yourself, right? But you kind of able to see how clients react to certain financial circumstances, right? One thing that really stood out to me is just loss aversion is powerful, right? So clients feel losses 2 times more than they'll ever feel gains, which obviously leads to poor decision making during downturns.
So you're saying emotionally, like they're more attached to losing money than gaining money.
Yes.
I made 20% last year, but I'm down 5. Like, where's the exit? Is that what you're saying?
No,
like
essentially, right?
Okay.
So it's like every time there's a loss, they're never gonna give you a round of applause when your portfolio's up, but there's that feeling of anxiety. Like I said, 2 times more losses when, your portfolio is not doing as well. So,
right. I mean, behavioral finance is one of one of the hardest things to like maybe even read, understand, explain, and that's why some people like seek professional money management,
right.
Because you get too attached, right? An example is like, hey, I bought a stock at $5, it's worth 10 today, and man, I'm holding on to that thing forever, and then 2 months later it's back to 5. You got round tripped, right? Because you're like, oh my god, I made all this money, and like this thing could be the next coming of Apple or Nvidia or whatever,
right.
and sometimes it doesn't play out that way. So like understanding, and understanding that making money is the most important thing. If you made money, you can always find the next opportunity to make money, right? So, like, that's an example.
No, of course. And I think it's kind of tough for, the do-it-yourselfers to kind of separate the emotional decision-making versus the rational decision-making, right? So, even smart, high-net-worth individuals make decisions based on fear and greed, panic selling or chasing high returns. So your job is often kind of behavioral coaching. You're not just portfolio manager. You're not just a portfolio manager. You're kind of helping them see the light at the end of the tunnel and sticking with the plan at that point.
Yeah, perfect. All right, what about estate planning?
Yeah, estate was pretty interesting. One of the cooler things that I learned about was, obviously business owners, their business is kind of their main asset, right? That's where they keep most of their money. So when it comes time to, separate yourself from the business, getting that business out of your estate, there's a few different ways to go about that, right? So
that's some pretty like advanced estate planning. You're in the CFP, you're not learning about wills, trust, durable power of attorneys, and revocable trusts, and like when you start talking about there's not. When you take a look at the general population, there's not a lot of business owners to begin with, right? In the grand scheme of things, there's a business that employs 100 people. There's one owner, right? Think about the scale of something like that. And then to learn something inside the CFP that is so fine detailed into a business owner exiting their business and creating the right structure behind it. that those are the things that you're being exposed to and learning to get the. I find that that's something I didn't even like. That's pretty fascinating to me to know like how deep and how layered that goes. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, no, it's essentially cool too. Like, you know, like I said, the business is kind of their major asset, right? And rather than having to pay all that estate tax, there's just ways to, you know, funnel that out of your, you know, gross estate, get it over to your family members. And there's also ways for you to continue making income off of that. So it's kind of like a double whammy, right? You're getting it out of your state. You're not having to pay estate taxes at death while still kind of benefiting from, you know.
Well, and that's just the legal structure. That's the estate plan. I mean, there's like tax planning then that goes on. It's all of this stuff is really incorporated because there's behavioral finance or behavioral issues with owning a business and selling the business and doing, you know, I don't want to call it the right thing, but like doing the best thing for yourself. Mm-hmm. Is that more emotional or is it more money driven?
Right.
You know, but then because we deal with a lot of business owners leaving their business, and now it's you know, business structures, and then so that it can set up the tax planning. Mm-hmm. All of this stuff needs to be, you know, thought about, pick a lane, and so that all of this stuff can, you know, fall like a domino, right? A domino effect.
Yeah,
I can't get to step 3 until I get step 1 and 2 in line, right?
Yep. So, everything's always layered, right?
Perfect. All right. What about what do we want to do next? What about tax planning?
Yeah, I guess kind of going off of, you know, how everything kind of tends to be layered up. You know, obviously we were just mentioning about, you know, business owners getting their business out of their state. You know, there's also some key valuation concepts there that really help with the tax planning side of things. So, you know, estate planning isn't just about moving assets, it's kind of how they're valued, right? And that kind of ties into taxes there. So business often get discounted. You know, it could be the lack of control, you know, having minority interests, lack of marketability. And then there's risk factors there that can kind of minimize the value of the business as well, which obviously has with taxes. So, you know, if the business relies heavily on one person, you know, key person risk, you know, the value can be lower. So essentially, you know, less stability, more justification for a discounted valuation, which in tune helps out with taxes, right?
And then let's talk, I mean, again, that's like a business owner focus. Let's think about like the quote unquote general investor. I had a first conversation with somebody, you know, looking to, you know, to see what our firm does, things like that. And after my first meeting, which I call a discovery meeting, you know, I discovered that they work with a very large company. I'm not going to name names. A very large company where the owner is on TV quite a bit. He's been around a long time. You see a lot of advertisements for this firm, and they really strike for, you know, asset management. The thing is as I was talking to this person, they don't really offer much behind it, or it's not. Or it's so the company is so gigantic that hey, we're gonna call the estate planner, and you know he's 5 weeks backed up, and after that, like we don't know, right? But the tax planning part of it is he owned and he has, you know, like $2 million inside of a non-qualified account, so it's a non-IRA account. And when this company got their hands on the portfolio and said, hey, we got it from here, you hired us, we're going to go put you in our model, they created $400,000 of long-term capital gains. That's an $80,000 tax bill.
Right.
He was not told about that until about 9 months later when the tax bill showed up. That's a problem, right? And I from other, you know, people in that situation where I'm having conversations for the first time, it is very common practice that happens a lot to people when they work with a particular large firm that if I've said the name, everyone's going to know what I'm talking about. But anyway.
Right. I think it's just because it pigeonholes them, right? I mean, if you're not really thinking about all the other factors that go into planning, it's you're going to make decisions based off of one motive, right?
Right. And that's when, you know, Mark and I created SWP. The vision was to have a one-stop shop where you have investments, but everyone does that. What about planning? Well, most people layer that on, but then you start, then you got taxes too, and then we can help with estate planning. When you start funneling all of that under one roof, it's dynamic and it's coordinated. It's comprehensive, right? So, all right. What about retirement planning? That's another section.
Yeah, I think one of the cooler parts of retirement planning was just learning about all the different retirement plans that are out there, right? And that you can offer to your employees, especially coming from a business owner perspective, right? So it was cool. Our professor shared like a golfing story from class. One of his former students, obviously a CFP now, he was doing a charity golf match, got paired up with the guy, and the guy immediately asked him, what he did for work. And as soon as he told him, hey, I'm a CFP, he's like, hey, don't pitch me. I'm here to have fun. Like, I just want to golf, right? I don't want to be sold. So, obviously.
But I love in video right now.
Right, exactly.
No,
so
we don't walk around doing that at all. At least I don't.
Well, what ended up taking place is, he's looking for a free lunch, right? So instead of saying, hey, I don't want to be pitched, and then he proceeds to ask him a bunch of questions about his business, if he's doing things right. And it's funny, they get to about the 9th hole, and the CFP looks at him and he says, hey, man, first thing you said to me is don't pitch me, right? And then as soon as we start moving, all you're doing is asking me about all these questions about, your current financial situation.
Yeah. Essentially,
he was pretty blunt with him. He says, I'll tell you right now, you have no idea what you're doing with your finances, right? So through conversation, that business
by the
owner,
12th hole, did they have an appointment booked?
Well, at the end of it, yeah. So that we're going to get there, right? So, he had a set plan, which, for him, it wasn't necessarily the best plan for him because it was just him and his wife, the only 2 employees. They had a few 1099 employees, but, they're maxing out their SEP every year. So it means they're making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Basically, the CFP told him, listen, you should be using a solo 401k. I'll throw you a bone here, right? You're over 50. You can put up to 70K in there, and you can add another 7.5K as your catch-up contribution. Mm-hmm. You could also take loans from this plan. If you run into any problems, you're protected under ERISA.
Right.
SEP, you're only protected up to 100K in that particular state, right? So needless to say, that golf partner ended up working with the CFP, completely changed the way he was able to save for retirement. But it was funny. He went home to his wife and he's like, wasn't that guy a jerk? And his wife's like, he's right. We don't have any idea what we're doing.
Oh, he still was in denial.
Yeah, until his wife came in and was like, you know what? Maybe you should start thinking about that. So
still don't pitch me. Don't do it. And then the level-headed one comes in, and it's the spouse, and it's like, hey, maybe you should get the wax out of your ears. All right, cool. All right, what's the next one? We got investments. The biggest thing that came to your mind.
Yeah,
taking that section.
Probably just the correlation risk. I mean, there's some clients that maybe have, let's say, 10 different stocks that, there's like, hey, I think I'm diversified, right? Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, if these stocks all move, in similar times of the market, then how much diversification do you really have?
Right. It's like the Mag 7. Mm-hmm. They're all in the same industry. They've done all, I'll tell you what, they move in the same direction.
Right.
They all going to go up together and they're all going to come down together, right? So what you're saying is having a, diversified portfolio of a basket of different industries, sectors of the market to pull it together because everything usually, so for example, it's kind of, I was talking to the investment team the other day in a TV appearance and I'm like, what don't we like right now? And they're like, well, just consumer discretion or consumer staples. Mm. So think of like Johnson & Johnson and Coca-Cola and Band-Aids and toilet paper, things like companies that make that stuff. Even with the conflicts in Iran and the run-up in, gold and stuff like that, when people are, quote-unquote, really scared, that's just where they flock because it's steady Eddie stuff. They're usually dividend payers. They've been around forever. Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, Coca, like those kind of companies. And he goes, man, they're not even in the room right now. Like they're just they are not participating and they have not done that in a long time.
Right.
Wait till they do, because there's really and he goes, we have exposure. We're not overly exposed because momentum and market sentiment is not there yet. But my guys watch this stuff every day. They'll notice when the flip, when the switch flips. But he goes, we're still involved because there's going to be a day where this stuff it's bottomed out. It's probably there now. It's bottomed out, but there's nothing to pick it off the mat, and something will. Right? Whether it's high inflation or more, negative GDP where people's, market starts going backwards and unemployment goes up, whatever those things might be, it's going to be in favor.
Right.
So you better have some involvement, right? Is that is that a good way to sum it up?
Yeah, no, I'd say so.
All right. Insurance planning. How about that?
Yeah, well, first things first, not all insurance is created equal, right? Big part of planning for us is kind of reviewing policies, uncovering missing coverages or just general misunderstandings that the client may have about their policy, right?
Right.
So it's kind of important to know that before something takes place, right? Insurance, you hope you don't ever have to use it, but, if push comes to shove, you better know what you got.
Right.
So, take home insurance, for example. Do you have basic coverage? You have broad coverage, open coverage? Understanding this can be, a world of difference. And another story that kind of stood out to me from class, one of my professors told me, he had a friend, he was living in Chicago, and he wanted him to review his home insurance policy, right? So, under basic coverage, freezing pipes aren't covered. Obviously, living in Chicago, you got some cold climates up there. So made the switch from, over to broad coverage. What do you know? A year and a half later, his pipes ended up freezing, and that switch ended up saving him, thousands of dollars. So just having a CFP in your corner to really understand the whole picture and being able to point out these minute things that you may not be able to think about in the present time, it can end up saving you a lot of money.
Yeah. One of the I'm actually talking to somebody later today. The one idea, one of the first meetings I had with the person is like, hey, I have children, and I'm a widower, and I want to make sure they each get like $500,000. He's got 3 kids,
right?
And his portfolio is just slightly above that $1.5 million threshold, right? So he wants to preserve that, right? So he's like, well, how do I preserve that while living my lifestyle, right? So this is where during the planning process, we'll talk about maybe even like advanced insurance strategies, where it's like, hey, maybe we set aside X amount of dollars. They will get what your wishes are. We'll get a $1.5 million life insurance policy. And they'll be divided by 3, and they'll each have the money that you have $1.2 or $1 million left over, or maybe 1.4 million. We can figure out what the structure looks like, so that you can now have free reign to experience what you saved, right? So there's a different level of that, but we got to see if it fits in the plan correctly, right? Like, I don't know how much this stuff's going to cost. It's a high level idea to incorporate into the plan, and see if it makes sense. And then it's like, hey, are you comfortable with this strategy? Does it resonate with you, right? And that's the behavioral side of things, coming back to different parts of the test that you've taken, I assume, right?
Right. Yep. Know it.
All right, man. Well, thanks for sharing all of kind of what goes into this. And this is a 20-minute conversation. That was a 6-hour test. You studied for like 2 months ahead of time, right?
Man.
How much time would you put in each section, would you say? 20 hours in each section at least?
At least, right? 10 chapters per section. The lectures, the lectures can take anywhere from an hour to up to 3 hours, right?
Good God.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot, right? The fatigue is real. I'm glad I was a one and done, because if I had to
what's the failure rate on the first time takers? Do you have any? Is there a stat out there?
See, I didn't even want to look, right? I didn't look at what percentage you needed to pass, what the pass fail rate was. I just wanted to kind of control what I can control, and kind of honestly over prepare more than anything, right?
Awesome.
So luckily I'm in that position now where I can enjoy the summer a little bit. I won't be nose deep in a textbook all summer long, and
awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. Well, congratulations on the test.
Thank you, Tony.
If you guys have any listeners and things like that, any comments, drop them on our page. If you have any questions, info@swpconnect.com. But with that, we'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
The opinions expressed in the podcast are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any investment, legal, financial, or tax strategy. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. Please consult a qualified professional about your individual needs.